Well, we might as well get started with let Brian do the introduction. So I'll call the meeting of the Meriden Amateur Radio Club to order for the activities meeting. Welcome our guest speaker, who we're very pleased and proud to have with us, and turn the proceedings over to Brian, N1BRI, to do the introductions and get us going. Brian?
Good evening, everybody. I'm glad those of you who are here could join us. I think it's going to be a real treat tonight. For those of you who don't know, Mike Murphy, Whiskey Uniform 2 Delta, he's a prolific YouTuber. His channel's absolute gold for those of us who like to tinker with these types of things, anything electronic, radio related. He's got a number of articles published on various publications, QST, Electric Radio, and the icing on the cake is that he also helped me get my first tube regen up and running. Really can't tell you how excited I was when he actually responded to my email, as meandering and crazy as it probably was. So really, it's a treat, and I'm really grateful for how responsive he's been, not just in helping me get my tube regen going, but also agreeing to do this. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Okay, well, thanks, guys. I need to share this screen. Let's see if I can do that. See if I can get the settings here. Why aren't they coming up? Zoom. Let's see. Why is Zoom not working here? I've got the Zoom window open, but I don't see the controls.
There should be a green thing near the bottom of the screen. It says share screen. It's usually green.
Yeah, I know. It's not here, though, for some reason. What's going on? Hold it. Let me click. Oh, there we go. It was minimized. Everything was minimized. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. So I am going to share this screen. Share. And then I'm going to put up the PowerPoint properly. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it anywhere near
We see it.
maximized enough that you can read it? How could I?
It's clear at full screen.
Okay. Okay, so you guys were interested in some of my experiments with primitive equipment. Equipment that was used in the 1920s when vacuum tubes first started to become something that was in the ham shack. Before that time, hams were using arc and spark and crystal radios and all that kind of stuff. But the transatlantic test in 1921 proved that vacuum tubes were going to be the way of the future. So all the hams wanted to be able to use tubes. So before we get into that, there's a job that we need to do right now, and that's to get more young folks into the hobby. Everybody knows that, right? We're trying to get more young folks in. And through my YouTube channel, I try to tempt them in with my unusual, my vintage stuff, radio theory, tubes are cool, old time solid state, germanium devices, whatever I can do, history that's different than the regular ham radio appliance kind of operating and software defined radios and all that stuff. That's interesting. That brings a lot of people in, but maybe some of this old stuff is tempting as well. But if that doesn't work, we always have YouTube channels like Risa. You guys watched YL Risa's stuff she puts out? She's a Russian ham, and she has a very active YouTube channel, and she does a lot of crazy stuff online and a lot of crazy stuff both at her rural, way out in the woods Russian site as well as on the Baltic. So I actually talked to her today. She was doing a crazy thing. She set up a kind of a ground plane antenna out on the Baltic Sea and on 10 meters this morning. And I actually was able to get a hold of her. And this is the kind of stunts she does. And I'm not going to play this whole thing, but Whiskey Uniform 2 Delta, Whiskey Uniform 2 Delta, Whiskey Uniform 2 Delta, Whiskey Uniform 2 Delta. Good afternoon, Risa. Good afternoon, Risa. You're 5 and 6, 56 in New Hampshire. Anyway, I'm not going to go through that whole thing, but I managed to get a hold of her on the ice. Another thing I do is I'm into surplus radios, and I have a lot of surplus equipment and use it on the air. It's a lot of fun using the old, World War II equipment and Korean War equipment. And there's different times when I can put that on the air for contests as well. But that's another thing that might be fascinating to the young people. My interests are, of course, my YouTube channel. I have a Facebook page where I put all my high resolution photos and schematics because people say, oh, I can't read your YouTube schematic. It went by too fast. I said, okay, just pause it, take a screenshot or something. But people want to have a good JPEG of a schematic and so on. So I have this support page where I put up all that stuff. So the other goal I've always had as I've been working, and I just retired this year, actually last year, summertime, was to separate my ham radio from my work. And I work in the electronics and radio and radio direction finding and surveillance equipment, police radio stuff. So I tried to separate my ham life from my work life by 25 to 50 years. So that's why I like the old stuff. So if I'm working on a state-of-the-art software-defined radio direction finder, I don't want to have that at home. I'd rather have a tube-type radio direction finder from World War II, okay? So this interest in the 1929 style equipment all started when I found out about the Antique Wireless Association, the AWA. This is a group that preserves the history of not only ham radio, but all types of radio and RF equipment. And they have a fabulous museum in Bloomfield, New York, which is near Rochester. And this museum has got artifacts, of all the typical radios that you'd think of, Marconi and, the type of equipment used in the Titanic, spark gap stuff. But they also have like the whole control console from the Voice of America station. They have different types of wireless artifacts from famous expeditions. And I think you'd really find yourself fascinated by visiting their museum. But they sponsor several amateur events every year. One of them is the Bruce Kelly 1929 QSO party. Now, this is a CW only event, so you've got to know code, but you have to use a transmitter type and a transmitting tube type that was developed before 1929 or before 1930. So, for instance, the type 10 triode was developed, around 1926, and there are variants of it that are made even today. The audiophiles still use it. You could use one of those tubes because the tube was developed before 1930. So it's not about using the actual artifact, it's about using the style of construction, the transmitter circuit, and the tube type that was developed before 1930. This year, the event was in November. It varies a little bit, November 11th, 12th, and 18th through 20. So it's 2 weekends, 2 24-hour periods over 2 weekends. And there was a lot of participation this year. A lot of new stations are building these little transmitters. They also have a builders group, and on groups, you can get together with other people that are building these little transmitters. WU2D is a big promoter of 1929 equipment. He lives on an island just a little bit west of Vancouver. You can use any receiver. This is about the transmitter. So you can use your most modern software-defined receiver, or your World War II boat anchor, or your Drake R4. But a lot of guys like to build a regen and use that in the contest. And I have a 2-tube regen that I sometimes use in the contest. This is what it looks like. This is what the back looks like. Again, it's trying to use period parts, 2-tube regen, and you can use tubes of the period. There's a lot of nice tubes available that you can use with a simple 2-tube autodyne is what they used to call these. Here's the schematic, and these are 3 typical tubes that you'd use in a regen like this. You could use an O1A, a type 26 triode, or a type 27 triode. Those are typical. There's probably 100 different tubes you could use in this that are pre-1930. It's a very simple Armstrong style regenerative receiver with a 1-tube audio amplifier to the headphones. What is it? So basically, you're going to hear some really strange signals during this contest. People purposely do not try to make their signal absolutely perfect. Of course, the transmitter doesn't want to sound absolutely perfect. It's a 1-tube or a 2-tube type affair. Sometimes it's a push-pull oscillator. Sometimes it's a oscillator driving a simple amplifier. Sometimes it's just a Hartley or a Colpitts oscillator. And it's very rare to hear them sound like a brand new rig. And these flavorful signals are easy to hear. It turns out that they stand out from the other CW, and it's very easy to copy them. Most of them are clean enough that you have no problem copying the code, even though it may sound a little bit funny.
Is that an R390?
Yeah, that's an R390 and a BC348 right there. So let's talk about tubes. Just a note about the tubes that we use in the contest. Far and away the most popular tube is the type 10 triode. The older versions of this are the UX210, and they're in kind of a globe style, which is a larger, older style from the 20s. It's the type of tube that's important, not that the tube was actually manufactured in the 1920s, but that the type was developed in the 1920s. That's important. So any class of this type 10 type triode would be appropriate for the transmitter. There are some people that use 45s, like this transmitter uses a 45. It's a smaller triode. These have become very popular for the audiophiles, so they've gotten pretty rare. And even the O1A and the 201A, these are very old tubes used in receivers in the 1920s. You can actually get a couple watts out of a tube like this. The 27 is probably your most economical tube, but you can use 211s. Those will run you a couple $100 if you get them from the audiophiles. And those are 50 watters. A lot of people like to use those because the note gets a little cleaner when you run them at lower voltage because they hardly even heat up. I use one of these on my 160 meter giant Hartley. It works great. Okay, just a note about so let's build a simple Hartley. Okay, this is the simplest type of transmitter, the Hartley oscillator, and it uses the least amount of parts. It's very easy to get a Hartley oscillator on the air and get it to sound very clean. Here we go.
Bruce Kelly CW Memorial Contest is held every December. This year we have a lot of participants I'd never heard before. People are starting to build 1929 style breadboard transmitters, and they're getting on the air. The quickest way to get on the air with one of these transmitters that are built in the 1929 style is with the Type 27 triode. Now this Type 27 triode is still very inexpensive. You can probably get 2 or 3 of them for $10 to $12. So this is the quick, easy, and inexpensive way to get on. This is a great little tube to get you started. And you can get 2 to 3 watts out of this triode. So this video is all about building your first, maybe your first tube type project, a 1929 style Hartley oscillator.
Who says you have to have period parts? Basically, you use what you've got and you make your first Hartley transmitter or pulpits oscillator transmitter. The Type 27 tube is very inexpensive. You can usually get these for under $10 each. Sometimes you'd get 2 for $10. You need a 5-pin tube socket, some standoffs for it, a radio frequency choke, a few capacitors, a resistor, and some type of tuning variable capacitor. This 2-section 365 receiving variable, that's a good place to start. You can get better capacitors as you move up, but let's get something on the air here. Very simple for the 1929 Bruce Kelly Memorial CW contest. So I showed you a regular receiving variable as the basis for the oscillator. A single section 365 puff cap will get you started. It will oscillate. It'll work fine. It'll get you going with the oscillator. And the Hartley will tune fine. The problem is these smaller capacitors are not as stable as larger, chunky capacitors. They're used for transmitting operation. Their plate spacing is very close. Now, at this very low power level of the 27 tube, you will be able to have a capacitor like this work for you, and you can get started with the oscillator and make contacts. But if you can get your hands on a beefier capacitor like this one here, see how this capacitor is built with the plates that are a lot wider spaced? That's really solid. It's not a gigantic capacitor. It doesn't have to be a really big capacitor. This one will easily handle anything you can do with a Type 27 tube, and it probably would work fine with the Type 10 as well. The other thing I'm showing here is an oversized knob that allows you to tune the transmitter with a little bit of advantage because of the size of the knob. Makes it easier to tune. What you want to be on the lookout for are vernier dials like this. You can get some vernier dials on the front of a beefier capacitor. That's going to give you the stability you need to run the 27 or the Type 10 at full power. So if you look at the schematic, you can see it's a simple Hartley oscillator. It's only using about 7 turns with a nice center tap in the middle. And I found that the Type 27 was very happy with 280, even 300 volts. So no problem putting the strap to it with the voltage. You're not going to be drawing any more than 30 or 40 milliamps. So a 100 milliamp meter is appropriate. And the layout is very straightforward. You can use plastic or ceramic standoffs. Again, use the modern parts and then slowly change them over to the period 1929 parts. winding the coil using soft copper tubing, mostly used for refrigeration. And I found that something between 10 and 15 feet of tubing will get you the coil you need for 40 meters, and probably 20 feet of tubing will do you for 80 meters, which you should end up with a very simple transmitter, easy to build. You can even wind your own choke. As you can see, I've got a choke that consists of about 150 turns of number 28 wire that takes the place of a 2.5 millihenry choke that you're more familiar with. But if you have the 2.5 millihenry choke, use it. Anyway, this is a simple transmitter to get you on the air for 80 meters or 40 meters. Probably 7 turns for 40 meters, 10 to 12 turns for 80 meters. And your output length can be anything from probably 5 turns for the 80 meter, 3 turns for the 40 meter. Doesn't have to be tubing. You can use tubing for the output length. I just use number 10. Okay. So you probably have some questions. I was pleasantly surprised by how nice a signal that thing put out. A pure sine wave. I didn't have any chirp when I had a decently regulated power supply because the current drain is so low. Especially when I was running a couple hundred volts, there wasn't even any more than 20 to 25 milliamps of drain. And most large tube type power supplies hardly even feel that. So the regulation's excellent. I did run it up as high as 290 volts DC with no trouble at all on the Type 27. It wasn't too hard to get 3 watts out at 80 meters and a couple watts out at 40 without fooling around too much. So there might be some questions on whether such a simple oscillator is legal on the band. And I have a very good receiver that has a dBm meter on it. It's a Watkins-Johnson surveillance receiver. It's about a $4,000 receiver. And I hook that up to a sense antenna in the yard where I can measure harmonics and spurs. And I found that the second harmonic was more than 55 dB below the 2-watt carrier. As I was transmitting into a tuned antenna, and I had a antenna matcher in line. What I found out is when I did not have the antenna matcher in line and I had about a 3-to-1 SWR in the antenna, that the oscillator was not happy. That not only did the radiated power go down, but it started to affect the note and it started to sound dirty. So you want to have a good, well-matched antenna or use an antenna tuner, just the way you do with your modern solid-state rigs. They like low SWR. Remember, this is a power oscillator. It's not only an oscillator, but you're stealing power from it all the time as you transmit. So everything you can do to keep things stable, both mechanically and electrically, makes the signal sound better. And of course, if your antenna is waving in the wind, you're going to see your signal change note. Matter of fact, we might even hear a little bit of that. So again, 200 to 300 volts at 30 milliamps with good regulation is recommended for such a simple transmitter. You can attempt to do kind of a period-looking power supply like this with everything open on a breadboard. I actually, excuse me, I actually built mine into a ATX power supply and made a nice compact power supply for the transmitter. If you want to go period, you can use a Type 80, which was developed before 1930. And here's an choke input type power supply that's capable of handling anything you can do with the Type 27. The 27, by the way, takes 2.5 volts at 1.7 amps. 2.5 volts at, I think, 1.75 amps is kind of an oddball voltage. you may find that you want to use a little DC power supply to light up the tube rather than trying to find a transformer or putting a big old power resistor in series with a 6.3 volt transformer, which is what I do. So I wanted to try to make a contact on the transmitter. So I contacted Steve, WU2D, who lives out west of Vancouver on an island. And I said, Steve, I want you to be my first contact. He said, okay, I'm willing to listen this week and see how the band acts. And when we get to Saturday night, I should know what's going on. So he says, he says, 40 meters, acting pretty good, just about my sunset. So why don't we try Saturday night, just about my sunset, which turned out to be about 8:30 Eastern time. So we gave it a try, and we had several different frequencies and several different times. We were going to try all weekend to try to make a contact. Anyway, this is the initial attempt.
So tonight I'm going to try to get a hold of WE7SL Steve. He's on the west coast of British Columbia on an island. That's Steve right there.
Like my keying. Anyway, I'm going to stop that. Um, anyway, it was successful on the first try, believe it or not. First try. And that's pretty amazing considering that we're we're going across the entire country with something that's around 1.5 watts out on 40 meters. But again, winter conditions helps. He studied the propagation, which helped, and it gave us a good shot to be able to do a fabulous CW QRP shot. So I call this retro QRP, right? It helps when you got a good receiver and you can cinch up the bandwidth. I was set for around 2 kilohertz bandwidth, and you can see I cinched it up a little bit to about 1 kilohertz. So that's the end of my program. I really have very little more. I mean, safety in the shack. We are working with high voltage here. And by the way, this shot is not my shack. Okay. This is Steve, WA1HUD, famous Steve from lives in Woburn, Mass, or Stoneham, I guess. And his basement is one of the most famous basements any ham has ever had. It literally is 3 dimensions of junk. I mean, you can reach in any direction and get some treasure in this basement. So I had him take a glamour shot of me freaking out in the basement. So anyway, I'm open for questions.